Joining me now on the program, our regular editor-at-large at The Australian, Paul Kelly. Paul, great to see you. First of all, Dan Tehan's comments on the Chinese students, particularly the fear of influence from the Chinese Communist Party on our university campuses, expressed by 4 Liberal MPs today. What did you make of his response?
Well, this is a test for the Australian university sector, Kieran. I mean, it's going to be a very, very contentious time because we'll see playing out in this country the tensions between Hong Kong and Beijing. And we know the university sector is very dependent on foreign students from Beijing. We've had the French review into freedom of speech on university campuses, which has shown there's a problem. The university vice-chancellors were most reluctant to address that. Some were keen, others weren't. That's now being attended to. But we've got the remarks from those 4 Liberal MPs from across the board in the Liberal Party, and this reflects the concern of the Liberal Party, which I think is quite wide and deep, about the condition of free speech on university campuses. So the universities do face a challenge in terms of how they handle these tensions between Hong Kong and Beijing, which will play out in this country and will play out on the university campus itself.
And they continue to play out those tensions further afield as well as China seeks to exert influence in our region. On the Pacific Leaders Gathering, what did you make of the Prime Minister's performance? Did he manage those difficulties, particularly around climate, well?
This was a very difficult meeting for Scott Morrison. I think he did well. He was isolated. The meeting was dominated by climate change. And this is an existential issue for these island states. It tended to create a sense of schism and contention, which ran right through the meeting. But the bottom line here is that Morrison is committed to the Pacific Step Up. He wants to engage in a more comprehensive way with the Pacific in terms of infrastructure, in terms of climate change. He wants to help them when it comes to climate change. In terms of financial contribution. He made it absolutely clear that there will be no fundamental change in Australia's policy in relation to climate change and in particular our position on coal, and frankly the idea that the Prime Minister would go to the South Pacific and change our policy is absurd. I think that his put down of the New Zealand Prime Minister was quite effective when she said Australia had to explain itself to the Pacific. And Morrison said, well, my job is to explain myself to the Australian public. Finally, I just think we should be aware of the fact that the demands made by the Pacific Island leaders that we do more in relation to emissions reduction and so on would, of course, lead to no change whatsoever in terms of the dilemmas facing these Pacific Island countries, and to suggest otherwise is unscientific and ludicrous.
And a couple of other matters. Scott Morrison yesterday picking up the concerns on the lobby group Get Up, calls it a shady organisation, is looking closer at its operations now.
This was a declaration of political war by Scott Morrison against Get Up. It's been coming for a long period of time. Morrison said that Get Up's claim to be an independent political organisation is a lie. He said its days of plausible deniability are over. He said it was an anti-Liberal party. He said it engaged in tactics of misogyny and bullying. Clearly, the Nicole Flint campaign run by Get Up will become iconic. Now, I think there are 2 things happening here. The first is the Prime Minister wants to discredit Get Up, and clearly Get Up overreached badly in that last election campaign. I think it's discredited itself to a very significant extent. The second thing will be a legal question. That is, the government will press the Australian Electoral Commission to redefine Get Up under the terms of the law so that it's subject to a lot more pressure. Now, how that plays out will be a more difficult issue for the government, but there's no doubt at all that Morrison and the government are absolutely determined to put Get Up in its place and to change its status.
And finally, Paul, we saw the turbulence on our markets, on Wall Street and the ASX and further afield. But Trump, at the start of the week, and I think it's been lost in a bit of the coverage, but he did pause on the next round of tariffs on $300 billion worth of Chinese imports. Has he blinked?
He's blinked. He's blinked big time. Trump's miscalculated. You see, the whole foundation of Trump's re-election campaign relates to the American economy, a strong economic performance in terms of growth and wages. And at the same time, he's pursuing this trade war against China. Well, he's taken it too far. He's undermined confidence in the global economy. We saw what happened to the yield curve this week. We've seen the estimates coming from United States financial analysts, which now say the possibility of a recession in America is about 35%. Trump pulled back. He blinked. He had to, because he's putting in jeopardy the absolute foundation stone for his own re-election.